All right, we are back. I don't know if you know this, guys, but this is when we generally let our hair down. So please, Chuck, take off the cap. take off your shirt.
Hair let down.
Let the chest hair out. Just get comfortable.
We got rid of that dead weight. It's so great after that.
Don't you feel a lot better about things?
It feels like now we can talk intelligently.
It's like the sun came out after that.
All right, here we are exclusively on Twitter. Where am I? There I am. Boom.
Hey.
MMAfighting.twitter.com. Again, answering your tweets. It has been a fun show. We've talked a lot about Jon Jones. We've talked a little bit about 215.
That's your idea of fun.
Going into 216. We've talked about MSG. We've talked about Canelo Triple G. We have received tweets from the masses over the past 24 hours. We have a few, more than a few, maybe, I don't know what a few actually consist of, but more than a handful.
Okay.
And I'll be firing them off your way. So let's get this party started on a Thursday afternoon. All right, here is tweet number 1. When will Stockton's favorite sons make a return? And you know what is interesting about this tweet? This was definitely written by a Canadian because they spelled favorite with a U.
Or a Brit.
Or a Brit, yes.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Damn it.
And they also didn't use the apostrophe S for Stockton's favorite. So
Yeah, well, trust me, you're going to see a lot of strange
Can I fix the grammar
here.
on these?
So they're talking, of course, about Nate and Nick Diaz. I can answer the when part, but I want to ask you guys specifically about them as well. I don't know if Nick Diaz is ever coming back. I mean, he has shown no interest. In fact, they kind of hit him with that provisional suspension for the whereabouts failure, and I don't even think he really cares at this point. Maybe if he's stuck for some money, he shows up in 5 or 6 years. But I think that we can comfortably say, at least for the time being, the return of Nick Diaz isn't happening anytime soon. I think Nate Diaz is coming back to fight Conor McGregor. I think it's the biggest fight that the UFC can make at this point. I think he could actually do over 2 million pay-per-view buys. Do you guys agree with that it's the biggest fight right now that they can make?
I was talking to you a little bit about this earlier. It kind of maddens you a little bit, like, why isn't he defending this belt? Why isn't Conor McGregor defending the belt? Like, there's a party that's like, okay, you've had your moment, you should be defending the belt. And obviously, Diaz is not going to fulfill that. But it's out there. The series is 1-1. You know it's a big pay-per-view. You have the new ownership. And I think that just the back and forth, it seems like both camps are sort of angling for it. So I think at this point, that is the fight. So to me, I don't, like Nate Diaz, he doesn't seem very interested, and you've probably talked to him a lot more than we do, but he doesn't even seem interested in coming back unless it's for something like McGregor. Yeah. So in my mind, that's the only fight he comes back for. When that happens, I don't know. You probably have a better idea.
Well, they wanted it to happen on December 30th. Yeah. I don't know if that's going to happen. John Kavanaugh saying last week that maybe it's a little too late in the game, but you never know. I mean, they need Conor to come back, and that was kind of the spoken deal, not really signed, but spoken, verbal. We'll see what happens. They could certainly use a big pay-per-view like that to end the year.
I mean, saying it's too late in the game is kind of a negotiating tactic in a sense. I mean, it didn't. I believe that Conor's camp even kind of poo-pooed the idea of fighting at the Garden at some point, if I'm not mistaken.
205?
I thought there was some
for this one?
When they fought in the Garden, I thought there was a...
yeah, well, because he fought August 20th.
Right, so there was some talk about, it's too soon.
That's true.
Well, sweeten the deal a little bit and we'll make some more. I'll go off on a tangent here and say that because of what we're just talking about, I feel like that this kind of elevates the Ferguson-Kevin Lee fight, which, as you guys know, I hate interim belts because I feel like they're meaningless, but I feel like this is one that is meaningful because I feel like this is going to be the real lightweight championship fight because I don't think that Conor McGregor is always about climbing, and he's not about looking over his shoulder at what's behind him. And with the one exception being Nate Diaz, but that part of that is because they're 1-1, and so he still wants to
money fight.
And it also is the biggest money, but he wants to go forward with something that's going to be more lucrative. And so why would he want to turn around and fight, a lightweight challenger or fight Max Holloway why would he do that? Why not just keep going forward and just take on the newer, bigger challenges for more money? And Nate Diaz would certainly be the
smartest
best.
thing they could do regarding that fight between Lee and Ferguson is attach Conor to it in some way. If you can get him to the fight, even better. But in the build-up, keep talking about how they're fighting for the chance to fight him. Yeah. You know what I mean?
do think, just on the Nick Diaz front, I do think he'll fight again at some point. I think he will, just because not in the foreseeable future, but I think there will be a moment where he'll come back and it'll make sense. I don't know, Lawler or something weird down the line.
I'm not going to write him off.
Yeah.
Especially someone who parties as much as he does. I mean, just look at his social media. He's in Vegas. The best is waking up, at 6 a.m. with my kids and quickly looking at Instagram, and he's at some club in Vegas. Like it says 1 minute ago. Like, wow, we cannot live any more different lives. All right, that was question number 1. Everyone wants to know about the Diaz brothers, so let's see what happens with them. But I do think smart money says Diaz, McGregor 3 sometime soon. Okay, question number 2. Here we go. What do we got? Tweet number 2. Lance Armstrong was stripped of his Tour de France titles for doping. Should the same happen to Jon? Was he ever really the champ? So we spoke a bit about, is he still the greatest of all time? Do you feel differently about him now, the way people in the cycling world feel differently about Lance Armstrong? Is everything under question?
Yeah, I guess it is. I mean, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine how he could be anything less than what he is, because all we've seen from him is a guy who just goes out there and just dominates everybody. Really, short of the Gustafsson fight, is really the only one where I could where it was anything other than him going out there and barely being challenged. So even if you imagine that his greatness would be diminished somewhat by if you took away performance-enhancing drugs, he still would be competitive to be considered the greatest or one of the greatest ever. So it's kind of a difficult thing to fathom, to imagine what it is, what is the impact of this test. But bottom line, you get tested, you pop for anabolic steroid, that's going to throw everything into question. Just like for Lance Armstrong, yeah, he was the fastest guy. He was the guy that could bicycle faster than anybody else in the world, and every single year he would bike faster than everybody else and get to the Arc de Triomphe. He was the first guy across the line at the Arc de Triomphe every year. But ultimately, what do we remember him for?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And it sucks because, honestly, when you look back, the spindly-legged kid, the pastor's son who was suplexing, Stefan Bonner, your first impressions of this guy were just like, man, this, how far is he going to go?
Right.
I mean, he was that guy from the get-go. How far is he going to take it? You knew that he could be a champion. It was a matter of when. He's out there chasing down people in Patterson, purse snatchers or whatever it was, right before he gets the belt against Shogun Rua. He goes through all these different things, and it's crazy that he built up this very specific image that was clean cut for a long time. And the biggest asterisk was his 12-6 elbows, you know what I mean, with Matt Hamill. And now we're at this position where you think the whole thing could be tainted. And honestly, looking back on it, I really do. I think it'll overshadow his whole career now, which is a shame because you went through so much with that guy just to have it overshadowed.
Yeah, the range that we've been through, it's like Tyron Woodley has kind of always been here. DJ has kind of always been here. Joanna Jacek is here, but we went from, the guy who took down the robber all the way till the guy who took down the robber to the DUI, to the cocaine, to the 200, to the hit and run. It's just amazing the range that we've been through with him. And so, look, he's still young, and maybe this is a part of the redemption story at some point. But as of right now, much like we said with Anderson, who had just one infraction, it's hard not to look at everything with a different lens. So we'll see what happens to Jon Jones. All right, let's move along now to question number 3 or tweet number 3. Good stuff. Got a lot of them. Here's number 3. If Cody Garbrandt finishes TJ Dillashaw with ease, and given his dominance over Dominic Cruz, would you go as far as to say he is the best male 135er of all time? When I first read this, I was like, this is a ridiculous question. Yeah. One title defense. But then when you consider who he beat and how he beat him, Dominic Cruz, and if he does beat TJ with ease, is that actually possible? Undefeated? Or is it too soon?
Tough, man. What he did to Dominic Cruz, regardless of what he does to Dillashaw, will always stand out in my mind because I just couldn't have foreseen anybody doing that to Dominic Cruz. It was like Dominic Cruz, and it was by, as big of a stretch as you could imagine, was the best 135er of all time, and it wasn't even close. The guy had, he was so unorthodox, so jittery, so flickery, just everything he was doing in there. You thought, this is, maybe he's not the perfect aesthetic for everybody, but he is the most dominant fighter in that division. But to get work like that, I guess the Dillashaw thing, I hold Dillashaw up there, but I kind of, there's parts of me that wants to see more of Dillashaw. I feel like we've seen him beat Barao, and I feel like that's still our biggest thing that we see. We saw him give a very competitive fight to Cruz. But I still feel like I want to see more before I put him in that same strata. But I would like to see the fight again with Cruz, knowing he is who he is, before I would make that claim. Yeah. I'd like to see them play that back.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little too soon, but I understand why someone would jump to that conclusion based upon what we know already, which is what he did to Cruz. And as a sidelight to that, I would offer this, that sometimes when you go out there and you fight a fight that goes the distance or goes toward the distance and almost maybe it finishes in the 5th round or something like that, you end up building up your reputation even more so than when you get a quick one. Like I mean, we'll always remember Conor McGregor knocking out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds, but there's always that little part of my back of my head, like, what if that one punch didn't happen? Like, how would he have handled Aldo in a sustained fight? You know, when you always have that question in the back of your head, at least I do. But then when I go out and I see a guy like Garbrandt competing with Cruz and beating him to the punch repeatedly over and over and over again through the course of an entire fight, it leaves less of a question. It's not like he got one punch in.
Sure.
He just beat him down.
You still want to see it a little longer, right? I mean, you still want to see the rematch, as you said, maybe a fight against a Jimmy Rivera. It still has to be a little longer.
I want to see a couple more. I want to see a little bit more. I don't want to say, well, you got this one title fight, you beat the guy who I think probably until now is considered the greatest, and then if he does go out and dominate Dillashaw, he makes a case, but you just need more.
I know Dominic, Demetrius was fighting up a weight class at the time, but it was just a casual win when he beat Demetrius Johnson. You look back on that sort of thing and you think, Dominic Cruz was a stud for a long time, so I feel like you got to see some more before you can supplant that.
All right, let's move along now. Great stuff. Let's see, I think this is number 4, tweet number 4. How do you consider by far this 2017 for the UFC, comparing it to last year? Better, the same, or a worse year? What do you guys think, Chuck?
Well, last year was tumultuous in the sense that you had the sale, you had UFC 200, which kind of played out. I mean, it was really an epic fail on a lot of levels, just given how we went into it, losing Jones and coming out. Very similar in a weird way, but I think that this year...
Not from a business standpoint.
No.
5 pay-per-views over $1 million last year.
Oh, I know. That from a business, if we're talking strictly business, then of course this year's far worse.
Yes.
It's not even close. But only in how it feels in terms of the cards and stuff like that. But ultimately, you still had your stars intact last year. I feel like this year, the biggest difference is, you've got Conor moonlighting in the boxing ring. You've got Ronda, who's basically AWOL. I don't think she's coming back. And then the whole Jon Jones fiasco. So I feel like you take those three pillars, and it makes for a whole. This year feels very bad to me, honestly. When you think back, maybe who knows at the tail end here in the final quarter, but so far it feels very bad for me. Like the UFC's year feels bad.
Yeah, I think 16 was a banner year for the UFC because it joined the sport of MMA in general, guided by the UFC, basically joined the major leagues, essentially. By that sale just changed everything, because just think of the perception around the sports world of what the UFC was, and before the sale and after the sale, it was like, wow, $4.2 billion. I mean, that's a big deal, and I don't know that many people in the casual sports world would have imagined that a company like the UFC would have sold for anything near that.
It was just, the Reebok stuff, the UFC 200 fiasco, the Ronda Rousey, thing.
But that pay-per-view did really well.
Of course, but I mean, just
196, 200, 202.
The death of the meritocracy. So like some of the stuff like you're talking about with like Diaz, for instance, those fights ended up being huge business, but they were also like completely detrimental to the meritocracy and all that stuff. So it has a similar feel of chaos, like kind of prevailing, but
I feel like all the stuff you're talking about, that was the spillover afterward. I feel as though when in the moment they were still pretty exciting things. Like when Nunes knocks out Rousey to basically end her career. Well, the end of her career that's the impact that's felt in 2017 and beyond.
Right.
For 2016, we still have the buildup of Ronda Rousey's coming back. She's coming back. Is she gonna? There were still a lot of people who thought, that she had a bad night against Holly Holm. She's gonna go back and she's gonna be back to her old self. And of course, that was not the case. So I think there's a lot of things that happened in 16 that really were really great for the sport, and some of the things that weren't so great, looking at it from the big picture, long-term view, that didn't really manifest until 17.
Think about those pay-per-views, and then just go a couple of months prior to 2016. You had 193, Melbourne, Holly Holm, Ronda Rousey. You had 194, Jose Aldo and Conor. Like, that was an amazing stretch. And then you compare it to, 208, 209, 210, 211, what it did on pay-per-view, 212. I mean, it just hasn't, business-wise. When I look back at 2016 and a little bit of 2015 and the Reebok deal and the USADA deal, when I look back at it now, To me, it is Lorenzo Fertitta building up the company by any means necessary in order to sell it. And then when I look at post-July, after he sold it, so he's trying to do everything to make it as, attractive as possible, biggest fights, rankings be damned, history be damned, trickle-down effect be damned. And then I look at post-sale, and I think, here's a new ownership group that's like, okay, we got to get going. We got to make a splash. We're going to New York. Who cares about the lightweight division? Like, just get Conor in there.
I know.
You know what I mean? No matter
100%.
what. Let's get Ronda back. No matter what. She doesn't have to do interviews? Fine, don't do interviews. We don't care if you don't do media. Just come back. And so it felt like those two things, and that's why Conor's timing was so great, because he was a beneficiary of the Lorenzo sale, building it up, and then a beneficiary of, the new guys trying to recoup, their debt and all that, and then thus Mayweather-McGregor happens as a result. I don't know if that fight happens in the Lorenzo era, if they're just kind of swimming along. So that's how I kind of view those 2 years, or these past 2 years, on September 14th of 2017.
Yeah, and 17 will be remembered, I think, as the year when the biggest star in MMA stepped outside of MMA.
The biggest story
to try to do something else. And while I know we spent a lot of time in the aftermath of that fight talking, giving credit to McGregor for putting on a pretty good showing. Ultimately, in the short form analysis of that, it's going to be, he stepped into boxing and got knocked out. I mean, essentially, the biggest star in MMA tried boxing, got knocked out,
but also got paid a hell of a lot more than he could dream of getting paid in MMA.
And how is that going to be received
and
back
open
in
the floodgates for others who want to go try that.
Right. All right.
Okay, that's 2017. Of course, still 3 months to go. Who knows what the hell is going to happen this year? Let's move along to our next tweet. Let's see what we got here. What is the deal with the Fighters Union? Any update from them or Bjorn? Why did they fail? What happened? Recap. All right, there's a lot there. But what is the deal with the Fighters Union? This is the deal with the Fighters Union.
I think you've answered it.
There is no deal with the Fighters Union. Around this time last year, we were talking about the PFA, and then a couple of months later, we were talking about the MMAAA, and we had the picture, and we had the conference call.
Oh my God.
And that is just amazing to me how Bjorn resurfaced and then disappeared because of the blowback.
So
I mean, literally days after the big, teleconference, Cerrone's showing up in Toronto saying, I had nothing to do with this.
I was just thinking that. I was like, it was days later, we're in Toronto, and he's like, that was blown out of proportion. I don't know.
And so are we surprised?
Well,
In hindsight, were we all naive? Did we, because we did a whole show basically on the PFA, and then we did a whole other show on the new one. And here we are 9 months later, and there is nothing. There is no traction, and they claim that behind the scenes, but I don't buy it.
It was that they had the active people, right? GSP, you had these, I guess he's active now, but you had guys who mattered. Dillashaw, right? Part of this. Kennedy, who still had a fight. Cerrone. That's what mattered at the time. It was just this weird Bjorn thing that, I don't know if that derailed. I don't know what. Honestly, I don't know where.
I think it did.
I mean, so it's like that.
Raised a massive red flag for everyone.
And so it's almost like, if they hadn't had him, who knows? Maybe we're still talking about it. Maybe it's going places. But I was being a little. I think I was naive. I mean, I think we all were thinking in terms of these things are very difficult to do. Probably nothing comes of it. We did this so many times. This particular one seemed to have a lot more traction, minus the Bjorn Rebney stuff. And I remember Kennedy saying, I'm going to be actively recruiting, going to gyms and stuff. I don't know if any of that's really happening. I just think it's one of those things that, big rev of an engine and then puttering out the line.
One thing I'll say about it, though, and I don't know, it's not a direct correlation to the Fighters Union, but it does seem as though in the time since the big announcement, all the hoo-ha about that, it seems like there's more fighters who are challenging the UFC decisions, particularly some of the champions. We're seeing a little bit more, a little bit less of I'm just a company man kind of
but
mentality.
They're not coming together. That is happening.
But I think that
every man for himself.
But there's still, but ultimately, coming together is a good thing. Collectively, you can get more than if you're not collective. I mean, I've been in unions in my life, and I've also worked in places where I wasn't a member of a union, and there's a big difference. If you're a union member, you have a voice, and if you're not in a union, well, basically you got to stand up for yourself. But unless you have some power or some leverage, you're not going to get anywhere. The people who have some leverage have stood up, and so some people are doing some things, and I don't even think they were doing that much of it before all this stuff happened. So I guess I'll say that's a bit of a baby step, just not a collective
I almost
thing.
feel like the Conor McGregor. Honestly, Conor McGregor's probably been the biggest aspect. His big picture approach to this game in general and all he's accomplished probably had a bigger effect on so many people's dissension and coming out and being more vocal. And
I think that the most disappointing thing has been when they first came out, like it was the first time that anyone who was interested in doing this actually had active fighters, not only active fighters, but big names, right? Former champions, legends, etc. And, you know, as quickly as you can say MMA, AAA, or AAA, you know, they're all kind of being like, oh yeah, I didn't really, you know. Like you ask any of them, like, what's going on? Yeah, I'm kind of just focusing on myself. Well, what did you do that for? Like, why were you there? What were you fighting for? And so that to me, because it was like, wow, this is the one that's going to change it all. I mean, like the PFA never really had anyone. They had Jeff Boris behind him, who has a history, but he had to, you know, go out there and recruit people on his own. And at 202, it was surreal. He's sitting there at the press conference and all that stuff. But that was going to be a very tough thing to do. These guys, the ones after, had 5 active fighters and respected
not disgruntled guys, specifically like some of the John Fitch and that sort of like
legit UFC stars. And a legend, and you know, it just kind of fizzled. To me, the shelf life was a week. It fizzled that following week. It was unbelievable.
In retrospect, it was. It was about a week long.
So that's your update. There's not much of an update, and we'll see what happens. But I don't think at this point it's happening anytime soon. I do agree that Conor has been actually, in a weird way, the biggest.
I mean, they had that fighter retreat and. You know, and there was, you get these little rumblings, like there are people trying to get things rolling, and you just get the sense that, actually the Neil Magny one specifically was like, wow, what an uphill battle. It just seemed like what he was trying to do was connect a million dots, and it was not going to happen.
Yeah, the sense that I get is that it is so hard to make it in MMA, it is so hard to get to the UFC, it's so hard to have an actual successful career in the UFC. No one wants to jeopardize that once they're there, because it's essentially a cup of coffee that you're having, you know, on average. And so you can't worry about that.
There's always the guy coming up behind you who's basically taking your roster spot, all told. I mean, that's just the way it works.
The system doesn't really favor the fighter in that regard. Okay, let's move along to our next tweet. And we talked about Fighters Union. This one somewhat related, if my memory serves me correct. I have a hair hanging off my face. Where is said tweet? There it is. Can you tell us more about the Union for Journalists and what's been going on? So it's not exactly a union. It's the MMA Mixed Martial Arts Journalists Association. I was a part of the small group of journalists, myself, Mark Ramundi at MMAFighting.com, Ben Folks of MMA Junkie, Chad Dundas of Bleacher Report, Dan Stupp of MMA Junkie, and of course Josh Gross of The Guardian, longtime MMA journalist. And for the past year, we worked together to just get it off the ground, to finally make it into a thing and have a constitution and a code of conduct and all these things. There is an interim board in place. I believe you guys signed up, right?
I'm signed up.
Okay. All right. I wondered if there were any scabs here.
We start our own.
You know, this is where I gotta go.
And so there's an interim board, and there are committees being set up as we speak. And by the end of the year, we're going to have formal elections, so that we don't want to just put ourselves in. You know, we want people to actually. And then, you know, people are like, well, what is the MMAJ going to do about this and that and this? We need to get up and running. We need to become a thing. We are a thing now, and now it's time to actually, you know, make the car go. But it's, you know, we're not going to report on ourselves. This was not meant to be like some big news story. It was just time that it happened, and I'm happy. Thank you for asking. I'm happy to report that it is continuing to happen and things are being done. We even had a somewhat informal meeting for the first time at prior to UFC 214. We even had an official menu with our names on it with MMAJ. It was very exciting. So yeah, it's happening.
It's almost like I don't know if this is too much, but you're in Anaheim. You have the meeting just down the street from where the idea probably hatched, from Forum, right?
That's right. It happened almost a year later.
Yep.
It happened exactly a year later.
So it's good. I mean, it's been great progress. From our perspective, I mean, I'm mostly on the outside looking in, but I mean...
You are a part of it.
Yeah, I'm part of it.
Your voice will be heard very soon.
Yep.
Have you ever been a part of a journalist association, any other beat?
Well, no, just being in the newspaper guild.
Yeah,
basically.
okay.
But which is, you know, a different kind of thing, but not like the pro football writers or any of those.
Because you weren't full time.
Yeah, I was always working. Most of my stuff back then, when I was in the union, was working as an editor as opposed to writing. So usually the writers are the ones that have the union, because they want to set standards for how the sport is covered in that regard.
Yeah, and one thing I will say as we're talking about this, and again, go to MMAJA.com if you want to learn more. This was never made to be some sort of confrontational group or to fight the evil empire. It's really to make ourselves better as a media corps and to help the younger generation and to just almost in a sense create a fellowship and police ourselves and to make sure that we're doing things the right way. And if things come up, which I'm sure they will, then we will tackle those. But if you are looking for some big splash, where we're picketing and that's not why. It may have been the impetus, it may have sort of ignited it, the catalyst, but it's more about making ourselves better.
100%.
Right.
All right, let's move along. And I think we do have one more, if not two. Yes, we do have two. Here we go. What is each of your guys' favorite sports team? Just pick one team from one sport. Number one.
Man. Well, I'm a Denver Broncos guy, so I would say that's probably
That's number one.
Number one, probably.
More than the Nuggets.
That's
More
what
than
I'm
the
saying.
Rockies.
I've followed the Nuggets longer, or at least the same amount of time. So I have a ridiculous. It's probably the same for you, the Knicks, where you're waiting and waiting and waiting. Every time they even get in the playoffs, it becomes fanatical.
Yeah.
But I'd have to say the Broncos on whole just tilts that way a little more. I don't know if they've been.
Are they doing so far?
Or wouldn't know.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the team that beat the Broncos in the Super Bowl in 1987.
Yeah.
Remember that?
No one was old
86
enough.
Well, it was 86 season and 87 Super Bowl.
Yeah.
The New York Football Giants.
Number one.
Absolutely.
39-20.
My grandfather was a Giants fan. My mother, the greatest birthday present I ever bought for my mother, and this is my entire life when I would go out when I was a little kid and buy something for her at the little store. Greatest thing ever was when I bought her season tickets to see the Giants
Wow.
for her 60th
What year?
birthday. It was her 60th birthday. It would have been in the, I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure when it was, but it was whenever it was.
Did you renew them, or was it a one-time thing?
No, I got them. I had them for quite some years, and at some point she didn't want to go as much. She would go to some, and so I started going. So.
Now, what do you do on Sundays? Like, are you religious? 3 hours, you can't be
You
bothered?
do not want to be around me on Sunday.
Really?
You could ask my wife. You do not want to be. My kids, do not want to be around me because I'm screaming and most of the
Throwing his liquor
most of the
bottle.
foul.
I can't even imagine it.
Most of the foul language that I use over the course of a week, I use up on Sunday between 1 and 4. So the rest of the week, I'm pretty even-tempered, but that's pretty sad.
And are you watching alone?
I like to watch it alone because
Okay.
nobody wants to be in the room with me. In the dark.
Now, outside your house, do you still have a Denver Broncos flag?
I do.
Standing tall.
Oh yeah.
I
And
was
this is
flying it
not
this week.
This is not just like a small flagpole. How
yeah,
high
It's a
is
real
this?
flagpole.
It's a big old flag.
No, like would you say it's like 30 feet
Yeah.
tall?
Easily.
Yeah, at least. It's a big.
This
It's a
is
big
bizarre.
full-size.
In the heart of Connecticut.
Yeah.
Here we have.
And I
This is
have
how
one
I-
that
when-
says Broncos. Broncos. You're in
Wow.
Broncos country.
So are you the same way on Sundays?
A little bit.
Will you ever? Do you miss the game? Like, are you the guy like, they're playing? I'll check on my phone, or you have to watch?
I'll be in Buffalo next week to see the Broncos play
wow.
the Bills. So I'll always pick out a game, go check
Okay.
it out. I try
But
to watch them. If I miss it, it's not the end of the world. But
Do
I'm
you have
like,
the pass?
I do, yeah.
Okay, you too. How do you? Oh, do you always get the Giants game?
Where I live, I almost always get the Giants game, so I rarely have
you don't?
to miss. I'll go to a bar and watch
Okay,
it.
well, you will make a point to watch.
I will make. I'm going to watch the game some way. I don't always watch.
interested in
Sometimes
yours.
Sometimes I don't have to. I will stay off social media because I will sometimes watch.
Sure.
I'll wait 20 minutes or 25 minutes into the game so I can watch it commercial free. If you DVR the game and then
Right.
then you watch it, you skip the commercials because I hate the commercials. So I'll wait till if it's a 1 o'clock game, I'll wait till 1:25 to start watching the game. So I have to stay off Twitter because I don't want to know what happened yet.
Sure.
And then I don't have to watch any commercials or halftime show or any of that
Amazing
nonsense.
insight.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Can I tell you the first full quarter that I watched of football last year was during the Super Bowl. And I was so proud of it.
Which quarter was it, the first or the fourth?
It was.
There's a growing number of people like you
Yeah.
who are just staying away from the sport now.
I'm picking
Your
the
team?
Knicks. I'm
The
picking
Knicks?
the
Yeah,
Knicks.
of course.
Yeah,
Wow, I thought the Expos
they're-
for sure.
Well, I mean, I can't.
There are
But
no.
you still can. I mean,
I guess I can, but I can't follow them. I
That's
mean, that
true.
would be a very depressing answer.
no,
I'm
but
still
if
living in
they were still around,
The Knicks were always number one.
Yeah,
The Knicks
okay.
were the ones that made me cry.
you
And
like
why? Because
basketball.
look, I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up very close to the Meadowlands, so it made perfect sense to be a fan. You grew up in Colorado, very close. What was it about the Knicks that?
I walked into a shoe store when I was 10 years old, and my brother said to me, "You need to buy those shoes." And they were Patrick Ewing shoes, and I never heard of them. And then I instantly became emotionally attached to him, like at a bizarre level. Like it was kind of weird how obsessed I became with him and the team, and they represented. I was kind of very interested in New York as a city, so they represented the city and the hard hat and the lunch pail, and those 90s Knicks to me are everything that is so great about the NBA. So I developed an unhealthy obsession with those 90s Knicks. Unfortunately, that obsession hasn't dissipated during the past 17 years after they traded Patrick, and it has been a very depressing time. Although when I see Kristaps, I feel like he is the second coming. In fact, I don't know if I've ever said this story. I think I have. On my 33rd birthday, I always wanted to be 33 because that was Patrick Ewing's number. On my 33rd birthday, I'm sitting in the airport, headed to Las Vegas, going to cover UFC 189, Mendes versus McGregor. And who do I see walking to my gate, going to Las Vegas? Kristaps Porzingis, prior to his first ever Knicks Summer League game. And I felt like that was a sign from up above telling me that this is the second coming. He will be the man to take the baton, take the torch, and lead us to the promised land.
You know what I liked?
This is completely irrational thinking on my part, but
that's what 10-year-olds do when they were. I know that.
But you were so diehard that when they picked him, I remember you were sick to your stomach for about 24 hours.
I was.
And then that's what changed.
And people give me crap for that all the time. What I say to them is, look at the Knicks' history in draft picks for the previous 20 years. They have given me no reason to believe that they knew what they were doing.
Thank God they had Phil Jackson at the wheel.
You don't backed into that one.
You didn't want Mudaye.
No.
He's at the Nuggets, and he's been...
I wanted anyone but Porzingis, I will admit that, because I knew that I didn't want the guy that they wanted.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because every other pick was horrible. They completely backed into that one. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I love Carmelo, and I don't believe that he's the 63rd ranked best player. You see that poll? Ridiculous. ESPN.
That's what
horrible.
they have.
That is insulting. All right. Last question. Here we go. Tweet from you. Most important one. Where does Jeff buy his shirts?
Oh, okay. So
go ahead and tell them.
This is it.
I think
I don't really want to say too much because I don't want to have to compete. But I get them. Let's see. I had one arrive in the mail with an unmarked package.
Get out of here.
And I swear to God, I thought it was like some maniac, and it turned out it was close to my birthday. It turned out it was my mother-in-law who sent it to me, but there was no thing like no return address.
This kind of shirt.
Yes, a shirt just like one of these kind of shirts. So I've gotten as gifts, and I go to I'll go to like some stores. I'll find them. I bought them on eBay. I've gone to like
secondhand.
Secondhand.
Are you big into the secondhand market?
Once in a while, if I see something I like.
The secondhand market.
I've gone to
sweat in that shirt. Are you kidding me? Get out of here.
I've gone to you kidding me? If you find some, you go to like vintage stores, you see stuff like, you go to like an old vintage store.
But is there one place that has been, the most frequent?
No, it's all over the place.
Really?
I don't tend to I don't think well, I need to go buy one. I just happen to be somewhere and I'll be like, oh, I like that.
Okay,
New
what about
New Orleans Jazz Fest? Whenever I go to Jazz Fest, I pick up a nice shirt.
Oldest shirt that you own that you still wear?
Like these kind of Hawaiian shirts?
Yeah, that's part of the rotation.
The oldest one of those is probably a Jazz Fest one. I have a Jazz Fest shirt from like, I don't know, the 90s somewhere.
Wow,
it's
like amazing. Have you ever been to Hawaii?
Yes, I did when I was a little kid. Yeah.
Well, how old?
I don't know.
Did you wear Hawaiian shirts?
I don't think I did then.
Maybe that's.
I don't think I did.
Tuxedos.
No, the reason why this is all because of like MMA. Because when I first went to MMA fights, I think it was maybe the first time I went to a UFC fight was God, I don't know what the fight was. It was the first Hughes Trigg in Connecticut at the Mohegan Sun, and I remember one of my first impressions was how everybody's dressed. Like everybody was dressed alike in these like sort of black T-shirts with like skulls and blood and gore. And everybody was dressed like that. And I thought, wow. So I'm gonna go. The next time I go to this, I'm gonna do something completely different. So I'm not like everybody else. And so the next time I went, I wore one of my New Orleans Jazz Fest shirts, and it was like this flowery thing, and it was more like ornate than this. And it was kind of funny because everybody else was wearing their the black, all the.
I never knew that it came from an actual.
It was just being a contrarian. It's a contrarian thing.
I want to ask you about your hats, but I'm going to let someone ask that next week.
Okay.
Yeah. Why give it away?
Coming next week.
Why give it away?
Got to leave them
Stay tuned.
more.
I think this first edition of After the Beat has been a huge success. About his shirts, about your unhealthy obsession. I feel like Jeff really is the one who kind of poured his soul
I'm learning
out.
things about Jeff today.
Yeah, this is great. All right.
Unhealthy.
Thank you very much for that. Great questions. Unfortunately, we are off next week. I'll be in Montreal for Rosh Hashanah.
Again?
Happy New Year. Yeah, Happy New Year to my fellow Jewish people. And I don't know what Luke is doing. I think he's on vacation or something. But we'll be back in 2 weeks. And we will do this again. We'll be taking your questions and comments. We'll be doing After the Beat, normal show, all that stuff and more. So we are done for now. Let me say goodbye. Thank you very much to everyone who watched. Thank you very much to Luke, who is now on his way, I think, to do his own radio show. Thank you very much to Chuck, Jeff. I am Ariel. Thank you very much for watching. And most importantly, enjoy the fights this weekend.